Bisexual Killjoy, the place where we know bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. I'm Bailey, and this is
Lynn.
In our last installment, we talked about the pernicious myth of passing privilege. What a romp that was. In today's episode, Does This Top Make Me Look Bi? We're doubling down on what it means to look like a bi+ person. That's right, the long-promised episode on signaling. And Lynn actually told me last week that I said more than once that we were going to have this episode without it actually being on the show notes list. So some would call that misremembrance and others would call it manifestation, because this is a topic I think about all the fucking time.
And we needed it to happen, right? I think our listeners are also very keen and very excited. Shout out to anybody who stayed just for the signaling episode, because Bailey kept referencing it even.
You're like, when's it gonna happen, Bailey?
Even if it wasn't in the plan. But before we get into it, it's gonna be fun. Bailey, what was your bisexual killjoy moment this week?
You know, the deeper we get into this project, the more I learn about the state of bisexuality, the more I want to do for bi+ folks in whatever way I can. So last year I started this writers group that you are a part of called the Bi+ Book Gang.
Yes!
For bi+ writers, because I'd never seen that type of community before. And we've grown quite a bit since last year, and it's nice, but I am so frustrated because TikTok specifically suppresses my videos about bisexuality.
What?
Not that my videos get a ton of traction anyway. It's not like I'm pulling down hundreds of thousands of views. But when I talk about bi+ness in any capacity, my video might not get any views at all. And I mean 0 views. But if I post like a stupid lip sync video about writing, it could get over 1,000 views. Like, seriously, I don't get like a ton of views, but you can just see the A versus B. It's demoralizing, especially since this community is so rich and full of talented authors who deserve their big break. They deserve their community moment. They deserve to be in a space where folks are, anyway. My bisexual killjoy moment this week was planning a workshop on imposter syndrome, which I imagine bi+ writers will get on 2 levels. So if you're a bi+ writer, poet, essayist, whatever, I welcome you to join me this Sunday, May 26th for that free workshop. The registration link is in our bio. I look forward to telling you that your imposter syndrome is a goddamn liar.
I am here for it. That sounds so exciting. Is it even how is it even algorithmically possible for a video to get 0 views though?
Yeah.
I feel like TikTok has so much.
I think the issue with the word bisexual is that it has sex in it. And I know some other creators get around this by saying bicycle enthusiasts.
Oh, okay.
Anyway.
Well, it is what it is. But I am so excited that you're having this session on imposter syndrome. I'm sure we've talked about it before on the podcast once or twice. In a world that constantly erases and diminishes the plurisexual experience, how could we ever have anything other than complicated feelings about our validity?
That is so true. I feel like that a lot, especially in queer spaces, which might be a surprise to some listeners and not a surprise to others. I want people to know that I'm queer, that I deserve to be in a queer space without getting a shitty look from a lesbian. So maybe I'll wear a bolder eyeshadow, wear my Frog and Toad tarot t-shirt, and put my hair up so I can show off my shrimp earrings in the hopes that someone will clock me as a bi. But that's what signaling literally is. Donning a uniform so that others in our community of choice recognize us as safe.
But I wonder what happens when your community is so diverse that there is no one way to make sure that others notice that you belong. I can look queer, but I can't really look bisexual because people first are going to assume my gender. In all fairness, first they're going to assume my race, then they're going to assume my gender, and then they're going to assume my sexuality. And if someone looks like a cisgender woman, but also looks like they might be bi and in the queer community, they're most likely to be labeled as a lesbian before they're even thought of as bisexual.
Because bisexual isn't seen as an option.
We're going back to that categorical erasure.
Boop, boop.
Back to the epistemological contract.
Epistemological. I cannot say it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I know, it's good. Bisexuality isn't allowed to be known or considered. And that's because most people see both sexuality and gender as a binary. Plurisexuals are inherently contrary to the binary, yet people categorize us the way they perceive as right or what they think might be accurate.
Which is wrong.
Stop assuming things, and let's talk about why.
So, In our last episode on the myth of straight passing privilege, you and I went around and around about looking queer. And you brought up this really good point about queer spaces being a place where performance and understanding of gender and sexuality are actively regulated and policed in this bid. You said a bid to preserve the culture that lesbians and gay men have created. As you just said, plurisexuals upset those understandings, right? And therefore are not remembered or welcomed to the so-called party. As a result, we're kind of left feeling like we don't belong to the queer community, at least not as bi+ people. Now, some of the folks I've spoken to about being bi+ said that they never felt uncertain about their place in the community, but that was due in large part to an intersecting identity, such as being either trans or non-binary. In other words, they look queer. But, and this is something I am actively struggling with here in my actual closet, what makes someone visibly queer?
And we're going to struggle with that question all throughout the rest of the episode. The first time I heard about signaling, it was somewhat early in my queer bisexual journey. And I've always been obsessed with secret things. I wanted to know all about the secret societies, all about spies, all about fairies. Tell me all of those little things that I'm not supposed to know. So it was always a fun thing to learn that people did X or Y thing to let others know that they're into each other. What's coming to mind is the code with fans in Victorian England or something. I have like a vague memory of fans being used to communicate things.
Oh, yeah, to like show people that you're single and ready to mingle, or you're married and ready to mingle, but don't let my husband know.
Exactly, which is why I think that I first understood it as like flirting. The first time that it sunk in as signaling, as in building a community that is identifiable, was when I read an article on sexuality marking. There's this article that explores the narratives of bisexual people in the #SoBisexual campaign, which is actually still running right now. That pulls out a few of the most prevalent themes that come up as bisexual people communicate their sexuality to others. The biggest one being defining their plurisexuality against myths and stigma, focusing on the enduring nature of their bisexuality. I kept seeing the same message. I'm bisexual regardless of who I'm dating. And yeah, I agree with that, but how did they tell each other that they were bi?
The $1,000,000 question.
Ooh. So I critique my education in the States a lot. It's my way of resisting the overarching power. That said, I have gained quite a bit pursuing this master's degree. And it was in my sociology of intersections class, literally a class on intersectionality, that I gave a presentation on heteronormativity. And the article that I had summarized quickly became one of my foundational citations for everything I wrote after that moment. Sexuality marking didn't start with bisexual people posting videos online about how much they like lemon bars or how weirdly they sit in chairs. It started with heterosexual people attempting to court one another.
I love the idea of like attempting to court.
They're just attempting to play a game. And the main argument being that women would perform their gender as a way to let others know that they're heterosexual, and men would perform their sexuality as a way to let others know that they are very, very straight. And definitely not anything else. So all of a sudden, my world made like 10 times more sense.
So what you're saying is that sexuality marking is a strategy deployed to make an individual's sexuality or sexual identity known within a social relation context.
Yes. Heterosexual marking can be defined as people behaving in ways that are interpreted as evidence that they are heterosexual, regardless of whether or not they intend to convey heterosexual status. They may not be intentionally doing that, but there are marks that we understand and interpret as heterosexual. A main aspect of heterosexual marking is based on gender and sexual orientation stereotypes that are then reinforced through marking. So heterosexual marking can be understood as an example of how heteronormativity, as in a normal sexual practice and a normal way of life, or what we understand as normal, depends on the exclusion or marginalization of other sexualities for its legitimacy. It works to define and maintain specific sexual practices and ways of life that are considered and determined to be normal.
Okay. So I'm going to push back on this so that I can understand it better. So the way that you're framing this argument sounds like you're saying that heterosexuals are consciously choosing to signal heteronormativity, and the way I see it, they aren't. Because heteronormativity in my mind is a result of dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, patriarchy. So everyone fits into a neat little role in order to keep women pregnant. Okay, I know that's super basic and that's too crude and basic a summary for such a large topic, but the patriarchy really does exist to keep men in roles as leaders, providers, and emotionally constipated, while women are relegated to the realm of feelings, food, and child rearing, and, non-binary doesn't exist. So historically speaking, at least from a European perspective, clothing has long been this way to signal power and status. You just mentioned Victorian fans.
Yeah.
The more money and power someone had, the more they had to subscribe to gender and sexuality politics. So if you think about the French courts in the 1600s and 1700s, there were so many rules about dressing. What could you wear? When could you wear it? Who could dress you? And every single outfit had its own significance. The cut of a dress could signify whether or not you were single, on the marriage mart, widowed, married, etc. And these wealthy and noble women who were traded as livestock to secure alliances were expected to wear these incredibly complicated outfits with pieces that made it difficult or impossible to pass through doors, sit down, or even go to the bathroom without assistance. So these outfits, these costumes, were designed to keep courts complacent, especially women who didn't have a whole lot of power in lawmaking or in war rooms. I mean, they had influence, sure, though many of the ones with real power were courtesans or mistresses of powerful men. And meanwhile, men have always had full bodily autonomy.
Clothing as a form of oppression, because of how literally huge and impossible it is to deal with, is something I can get behind. I mean, I am really tired of wearing a bra, and I'm tired of wearing anything that's not leggings. Like, why?
I love my little bralette because it keeps my boob from touching any other part of my body, and I'm here for that. So anyway, you're listening to me rant about French court clothing, and you might be sitting there wondering, Bailey, what the fuck does this have to do with anything? And to which I reply, so much. Now, I know that I'm coming at this from a Eurocentric perspective, but it's the one I have the most knowledge of and the one I see have a long-lasting effect on American fashion culture. Okay, so after the French Revolution... This isn't even a joke, though, Lynn. Mm-hmm. I'm actually obsessed with the French Revolution.
Okay.
Just so everyone knows, history has echoes. She repeats. Anyway, so fashion got progressively more streamlined. Here's my book on Napoleon that I just have sitting in my closet with me.
Okay, yes.
So after the French Revolution, fashion gets progressively more streamlined in terms of silhouettes because society was changing. America and France really said no more kings, and the world was taking notice. Fashion lost its ornamentation as we moved into the Industrial Revolution.
What? Not the Industrial Revolution, Bailey.
Look. I said that we shouldn't hit people with the Industrial Revolution at episode 1. Now we can talk about it, because
okay, so
she's the root of a lot of ills.
So now it's okay. I see.
Now it's fine. Consider the genie out of this bottle, basically. Industrial Revolution, there are more women than ever out of the house, tending families and entering the workforce. 1900s, one word, flappers. Women get the right to vote. They cut their hair, which has been this Western symbol of femininity for literally thousands of years. Then boom, 2 world wars, and women become integral parts of the economy, and nothing can stop us. The feminist movement pushes women to demand equality. They burn bras, they wear pants, they focus on careers instead of family, and scare the shit out of men. Or rather, they scare the shit out of the patriarchy. And automatically, if a woman wore pants, she was a feminist, a lesbian, or ugly. So now, and throughout this long, complicated history, clothing has gender implication. Masculinity is locked up with pants, solids, and muted colors. Thanks, Beau Brummell. And femininity has to be light and preferably flowing. And if you subscribe to those standards and have a face and body that align with the dominant culture's idea of what a man or woman should look like, then you will be read as a man or a woman.
Precisely. And you said a key word there, Bailey. Symbols. Symbols are a powerful force, and what we do with them holds a great amount of significance. Short hair continues to be interpreted as a rejection of femininity. And as I'm thinking about that, I remember this one Instagram reel that I sent you about a bi comic making a joke about bisexuality. And basically what she says is just kind of like, hey, I am setting up my dating dating app and I put to match with men and women, and my friends are like, but your hair, because notably she has a pixie cut.
Oh, right.
And everyone around her has only seen her with like this one woman that she was dating. And it's like, yeah, so, but your hair. And I cracked up so much at that joke because I get it. That is a really big reason why I have never cut my hair that short. I'm kind of terrified of being perceived that way. And the patriarchy is a powerful force, and everything that we consider quote unquote normal or constitutive of the normative stems from that which upholds the patriarchy. It is absolutely true to say that heteronormativity, and by extension sexuality marking, is a product of the patriarchy's attempt to solidify its place in the world. That said, just because it's a product of the patriarchy, it does not mean that there isn't an intentional effort by individuals to perform in a normative way and to signal that what they're doing is both normal and right.
You're just giving me too much to think about here right now on the floor on my closet. I'm like, huh. You know, when we discussed bisexual erasure in the past, we spoke quite a bit about binaries. Heteronormativity works by actively affirming itself as natural. I'm going to put very sarcastic quotes around that, and necessary. And so the direct opposite of that would be perceived as unnatural. I mean, how many times have we heard the unnatural argument against same-sex marriage?
Exactly. So when we speak about normativity, we're talking about the remnants of very explicit and policed rules that were once written down, or for all intents and purposes, they might as well have been, considering how closely everyone followed. And as I hear you talk about the way fashion evolved in high society, I'm thinking about what my mom told me was quote unquote appropriate to wear at different points in my childhood. It's less of a thing nowadays, as most things, but I used to hear my family say that girls couldn't wear heels until they had their ceremony as quinceañeras, marking their transition into womanhood. So for those parents who allowed their daughters to wear heels before they turned 15, the gossip would spread around town about how she was being raised to be indecent. And, you know, the heels themselves aren't important, but they were a symbol that was used to communicate womanhood and to some extent availability. If we understand sexuality marking as a collection of behaviors that indicate a person's sexuality or sexual orientation, we're taught to mark heterosexuality since we're kids. Does anyone else remember being told, guys like girls that wear or do or say?
Yeah.
And I wasn't raised as a guy, but from what limited information I gather, it also isn't uncommon for those around boys to question a guy's gender or sexuality if they aren't being constantly explicit about liking women sexually. It is this strong link between gender and sexuality that, yes, it's imposed on us by the patriarchy that makes heterosexual sexuality a set of behaviors that are considered normal. And this is arguably the biggest reason why those who are around bisexual people will say things like, do you like girls? Because you look like a guy with how you're dressed. Signaling same-gender desire takes an inverse understanding of what these normative behaviors are. Homonormativity is the attempt to assimilate into these normative behaviors. And the easiest way to do that is just by reversing it. If girls behave like guys, that's because they like girls. If boys behave like girls, it's because they like boys.
So we find ourselves returning to what we're calling sexuality marking for queer spaces. I remember in our last episode, you spoke on how heteronormativity extends out into LG spaces. Can you tie these two ideas together for the listeners and definitely not me?
This kind of binary correlation extends into LG spaces too. Lesbians will struggle with signaling their sexuality because the way that they are read depends almost strictly on how they perform their gender. We'll link a reference to this in the show notes. It's called Standing Out/Fitting In, Identity, Appearance, and Authenticity in Gay and Lesbian Communities. Butch women will have a much easier time being read as lesbian in comparison to more feminine presenting women. This is when I truly began to understand what homonormativity even meant, because at first it was a little confusing to me. Adopting heterosexual norms and adapting them into LG spaces and culture is homonormativity. You're trying to establish something that is directly contrary to normalcy as something that is exactly the same thing. So what the practice of these norms in LG spaces says is, I only want the same thing you want. And that made so much more sense to me as I saw gender performance as the main way of signaling to others who or what you were into.
I will say that sounds frustrating too. I know Lesbian Visibility Week wasn't too long ago, and I saw posts about how different variations of lesbianism are valid, like aro lesbian, trans lesbian, etc. And this just goes to show that heteronormativity has huge implications for LG communities too. If you look like a straight girl, you might not get hit on. If you're a trans woman, you might not be as welcome to the party or may even be antagonized. The patriarchy and prescribed gender roles has us thinking that you have to look a certain way to identify as something, and that's a bunch of bullshit. You know what makes you a lesbian? Identifying as a lesbian.
And the same thing goes for bisexuality. You're bi because you identify as bi. But bisexuality has a special talent because of its fluidity. Specifically, bisexual marking is confusing to both camps. So, how do we signal?
The billion-dollar question.
Okay, so stay with me for a second. Research talks about how bisexuality fights against binaries and emphasizes the enduring nature of bisexuality. Social outreach, like hashtag Still Bisexual campaign, speaks to the diverse nature of plurisexuality. However, when bisexual people talk to each other, we don't always talk about stigma or myths that surround plurisexuality. We talk about how freaking cool it is to be bisexual. We talk about the fun ways we let others know we're bisexual and what aspects of ourselves we've discovered because of our bisexuality. And then we dive into the ways we do signal, we don't signal, or how we navigate being bisexual out in the world. What do you wear to feel queer? That sort of thing.
You know, here's a funny thing about bisexuality. Once you understand the strength and pervasiveness of this binary correlation between sexuality and gender, why bisexual people have such a hard time coming to terms with their genders and finding each other makes so much more sense. We can't just rely on these norms. We have to identify if someone around us signals some kind of queerness and then take the first step to ask, hello, are you bisexual? And that's why we're coming out all the fucking time. Well, not me. I just started to assume that A, everyone is bisexual, B, everyone is into me, and C, everyone hates me.
That sounds like an oxymoron, Bailey.
Yeah, no, you got it.
Now, signaling queerness is a big issue because to queer, that is, to queer as a verb, an action, is to turn the norms over on their head, spin them around. Technically, everything that is alt is queer. So how do we move through places attempting to signal our sexuality? By encouraging alt behavior in alt fashion styles. The way we've kind of learned to signal queerness is through dyeing our hair, wearing funky earrings, not subscribing to cishet ways of existing and performing. But as we move into more welcoming and accepting age, or at least, I want to think that's what we're doing, we have also begun to understand that people can look however they look, and that doesn't relate to how they identify. In our attempt to move past stereotypes, it's also harder to find each other. So we resort to more obvious kinds of signaling. Bisexual flags, bisexual pride pins, or my personal favorite, coming out first to someone you think might be queer.
Again, I really think there's stock in just assume everyone is bisexual. That's your best bet. You're not going to be wrong every time. And it's a fabulous compliment to be considered bi. Like, you must look really cool because I think you're bi. But we're talking about signaling, and it's so funny because today I went to a bisexual resource center volunteer picnic, and everyone who showed up, you knew they were bisexual because everyone was wearing some version of a black overcoat. Two of us were wearing black leather jackets. One of us was wearing a black denim jacket. And then someone else was wearing this black flannel, and then another black and white plaid flannel underneath that, and then another graphic tee underneath that. And then we were all wearing some version of a Doc Marten, a Mary Jane, a Converse. And then someone else was just wearing like a comfy workout shoe, but it was gray. And I don't know, something about the configuration of these outfits they were so bi. Someone had purple hair. I was wearing funky jewelry, and we were all sitting around eating gluten-free snacks. I don't know. There's something about that is super bisexual. And once you start looking for it, we were just kind of people watching in the Boston Common, and someone would walk by with combat boots on and be like, do you think that person's bisexual? And they're like, maybe. Is it? They are. They are bisexual. Saw someone else walk by in this fabulous black and white print dress and these pink go-go boots. I'm like, do you think that person's bisexual? And they're like, I don't know. Maybe some type of queer. Maybe a lesbian. I said, they're bisexual. So that's my game. Are they bi? And my answer is 9 times out of 10, yes.
As I hear you describing people's outfits, I am now worried that I don't actually have the uniform in my closet. Most of my coats are white, and most of what I wear is like black and white, so.
I don't know if it's a uniform, though. That's the thing. There's just something, when you put it all together, it is magically bisexual. My first outfit of the day was a purple dress and a white cardigan and some frilly socks and some little sneakers. And looking at it all together, I'm like, yeah, I'd clock me. I'd clock me as something. It's the magic of the complete piece.
You know, freshman year of college, I started dyeing my hair, my entire head purple. It looked amazing. I took such great care of it. My entire head, this like indigo purple color. And then after that, I dyed it pink. And then I dyed it blue. And then after blue, I went back to purple. And I just grew it out as purple so that I could go back to my normal hair color because I was going into grad school and into professional. And I was terrified that having my hair dyed would look too much.
Was anyone in your grad program straight?
Was anyone in my grad program straight? I mean, the faculty.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like no better place to have purple hair than in a grad program.
I think it's definitely confusing because it's also a situation of how many weird checkboxes do you complete. If there are too many, you start being excluded from things. And I'm already like... But anyway, the signaling story that I wanted to tell is that we had a spring celebration to celebrate the culmination of the semester and the whole year overall. And I got asked to give a speech, to be a graduate student speaker. So I dressed up in this white sequin shirt. It's a t-shirt, it's white, but it's just all sequins. And I love it so much. It's so sparkly. With some jeans and some Converse, and I cuffed my jeans. And I felt so bisexual. Like, I looked at myself and I'm like, you know, I feel very bi. This is bomb. And I asked someone, the DJ for the celebration, I was like, do you think that I look bi? Like, what do you think? And she's like, well, I think that you need a flannel to just tie it all together and to make sure that everybody knows that you're bi.
Oh, yeah. Oh, is that picture you sent me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No. See, I would have clocked you. I would have been like, look at those Converse. Look at them cuffed jeans. You're in the club?
Right? I looked at her so incredulously and I was like, but my jeans are cuffed and I have Converse. Don't you see? Look.
Why do you think it's so important to signal when most people are obviously not picking up what we're putting down?
Honestly, quite frankly, it's important because it's fun. It's important because you finding others that are like you and diving into these cute community quirks is important for your joy. It's important for your community building, for your self-esteem, for your overall health. And it's important to emphasize that. And I think that the secondary benefit is to make sure that we exist. The more you're able to signal or gain the confidence to say, hey, I'm bi, my pronouns are any, all, what about you? We start identifying each other and we start noticing that bisexuality is visible and it is recognizable in ourselves and in others. And I would also say that your strategy of assuming that everybody's bi is also very amazing because I also assume that everyone is bi, that everyone is polyamorous until proven otherwise. Like, until somebody tells me I am so flattered, but I have a partner and I'm monogamous, I'm not going to think that you are anything other than poly or bi.
You know, I think there's something inherently chaotically good about that. I have an agenda. I'm not going to push it on anyone, but I know it's important. And therefore, I am going to be subversive in the way that I deliver information and promote my agenda. So we are at the part of the show where we like to do a call for action. And for our allies listening, you may be wondering exactly what it is you can do against patriarchal expectations of hetero and homonormativity. Now, what can any of us do in the face of systematic oppression? And when it comes to something as pervasive as it is, all we can ask you to do is challenge any preconceived notions you might have about gender and sexuality. You know, that image that pops to mind when I say gay man? Toss it out. Queerness comes in so many shades that there is no point in trying to assign a universal image to it.
Preach. And for our fellow bisexual killjoys, I know this topic can get really tough and difficult. I mean, writing this episode was surprisingly hard for the both of us, even as passionate as we are about trying to figure out how it is to look bi. What does it even mean? I think at the end of this episode, we both realize that bisexuality doesn't have to look like anything. It shouldn't have to look like anything. That's the beauty of our community. So for now, please remember that no matter what you look like or how you dress or how you act, you are bi.
If someone tells you that you do not look bi, reply, "What a weird thing to say to somebody," or read them for filth. Dealer's choice.
And wear a piece of bi plus swag, but only if it makes you feel good. I live for my bi plus pins and stickers, but that doesn't mean everyone has to.
For our LGBT groups that are listening, you may notice a theme in our podcast that all we really want from you is that our community is treated well and gets support. In this instance, stop making fucking assumptions about what a queer person should look like. If someone shows up to an event or is engaging in the community, assume that they belong there and didn't just stumble upon your show, your inbox, or your social media. As we close this episode and reflect on signaling, this thing that is so near and dear to our hearts, but like Lynn just said, we wrestled with. It took us twice as long as normal to write this episode because I think both of us are asking, well, Lynn from the academic sense where why is it like this? Because we've got hetero and homonormativity.
Yeah.
And on the other side, as just like a bi plus person, what does it mean to look bisexual? What does it mean to look queer? And I think by talking about the history of heteronormativity, talking
and
about
the Industrial Revolution.
And the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution. Thank you very much. I think that we're still seeing echoes of the French Revolution. Sorry, that's a different podcast. But acknowledging that there is this long history that we are actively working against right now. I mean, if you think about it in historical context, women have only had the opportunity to wear pants without being jailed for less than 100 years.
Wow.
That's a lot of change in a short amount of time. So what does it mean to be bi? What does it mean to look bi? Lynn, you said it right. There's no one way to do it. If you say you're bi, baby, you're bi. And you can wear whatever you want to. And just start assuming everyone's bisexual.
That is truly the most subversive act. You may think it's only in your head, but the power of assumption is actually really, really powerful. Being able to act as if, it's truly transformative. That's how I've found most dates as a polyam person. Just saying.
As the season's gone on, we have gotten some lovely emails and comments on our social media about what this podcast has opened up your eyes to, what it's meant to you. And you've also brought us some really great ideas. Recently, I had a conversation with someone in the Bi Plus book gang where they wanted to talk about bisexuality and neurodivergence, which I think is a fabulous idea. And we'll definitely go on the planning sheet for season 2, where we not only bring people on to the podcast to chat, but to maybe read some mail, to hear your perspective on being neurodivergent and bi+. And if you ever have ideas for the podcast, don't be shy. We want to know. We want to make this podcast for you. We have also gotten a request for where can I find bi+ community? Where can I find people who are like me? It's a great, complicated question that I can't wait to get into. So, Lynn, do you have anything you want to add to that?
We're excited to continue hearing your thoughts, and please make sure that you also subscribe to the Substack. We have a newsletter, and you'll hear lots of thoughts there, and make sure to engage with us on the Instagram. We love to hear from you.
I mean, really, subscribe to the Substack because I think both of us plan on being a little more unhinged there.
Truly.
Learn more about the French Revolution.
Learn more about the Industrial Revolution.
So thank you very much for tuning into Bisexual Killjoy, where we know that bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon.
It's a fucking phenomenon.
It's a fucking phenomenon. We're phenomenal. We are excited for the rest of the season, if you couldn't tell. Releases will be every other Wednesday throughout June. To support our work, follow us on Instagram and rate our podcast, preferably 5 stars, so more people can find us. We want to hear from you. Share your stories with us on Instagram or via email at bisexualkilljoy@gmail.com. Until then, keep being a bisexual killjoy.
Stay bisexual and stay strong.